Hello and welcome to my channel. Hi, I'm Wendy J. Haney. We are on a roll and I've done what did I do last month? Aunt Suki's quilt block last month. We've done Sister's Choice, so we're on a roll of doing some more blocks around the women in our life. So today we've got Aunt Dinah. Yep, this is another 12-inch finished block. And as you can see, I'm using some coordinating colors that'll go well with my other block in hopes that I can put these all into a kind of a scrappy quilt. Well, not scrappy, it's gonna be organized. Quilt that coordinates my blocks. Sampler quilt, that's the word I was looking for. A sampler quilt of all my blocks later. This is a 12-inch finished block. So in general, we're dealing with primary blocks that are 4.5-inch unfinished. And if you do a Google search online, you can find this with various different layouts where some of them have just 2 colors and others multiple. I've seen another one that's completely scrappy. The other difference I've seen from the version I picked out is this square in the corner is a solid square instead of my half square triangle. And the other one I've seen is where this is, well, it's an hourglass, if you will. So this triangle is split there. But given the colors I've chosen, it seems really silly to make that a split triangle when I want the same colors. So take a look at it and you can kind of adjust it if you're good at that, or go Google it and find some other pictures and look at some different color options. This one looks really interesting depending on how you lay it out in a quilt. I've got 2 different layouts that I'll show you and that I'll put in the template that I'm going to provide. You can get a link to the template in the bottom here, and it's going to have the coloring template and the size fabrics that you need for various blocks. Okay, so what do we need? I have my pale orange, my dark purple, and my light blue. What we're going to do to make this go together really quickly is we're going to make our half square triangles in our corners 4 at a time. Yep, lickety split, and we've got what we need for our corners. Then these here are half square triangles that we cut in half. So as you can see here, they're opposites. This is this way, and if you turn it, you realize it coordinates with that one, which means we can do 2 half square triangles of the purple and blue and cut those in half to get what we need for that. And then I'm going to get our triangles out of squares. So we're not cutting itty bitty triangles. We're going to cut squares and then slice and dice as we need. So what do we need? For the blue, we need our a 6-inch for our larger half square triangles that we're going to cut in half, that we're going to do 2 at a time. So that's going to come in handy for this. We have our 4.25-inch blue, because we're going to use that to make our 4 at a time half square triangles for the corner. And then we've got our center that is a 4.5-inch square. Okay, so with our purple, because we're coordinating it with our light blue for our half square triangles, we've got a 6-inch purple. I take that back. Yes, a 6-inch purple. We've got a 4.25-inch purple to make our other pairs of half square triangles. And we have a 2 5.25. And what these are for is we're going to cut them in half to get our triangle here. And then we have our oranges. We have 2 5.25-inch squares and 2 4.25-inch squares. These we're going to cut in half. Okay, so let's do that. Let's deal with the ones that we're going to cut apart. So we just get this done lickety split. Our large triangles, we've got 2 orange and 2 purple. You can decide whether you want to cut them at the same time or not. If your cutting is really good, you could stack those on top of each other and cut them in half. Okay, you now have 4 of your large pale orange triangles. Also, the method I'm using here is going to allow us to trim up almost everything. This, because we've got lots of angles and things in here, this allows you to have a more accuracy because you're cutting things a little larger and able to trim down to the exact size you need. Okay, these, I prefer to do these. Actually, let me set the orange aside. We're going to get our purple done since we're here. Yeah, make sure those are accurately laid together before I cut them 2 at a time. And feel free to cut them 1 at a time. For expediency, I'm cutting them 2 at a time. So now I've got my 4 large purple triangles that I need. Set those aside. Now, these orange ones, the small 4 1/4 inch, I prefer to cut 1 at a time because we're going to cut them on the diagonal twice. So you're going to want to be accurate with these. These are, I'm using a rotating mat so I can not mess them up. Okay. And one more time. These are going to go here on your corner squares. And they're kind of the one things that we'll actually have to deal with as triangles. To be exactly the size you needed, you would have cut this square 4 1/8. And I just, sorry, can't deal with the 1/8. So we're cutting it 4 1/4. That means we've got just a tad, very little tad, bit of wiggle room. All right, there we go. Now, whoopsie, whoopsie, whoopsie. Now we have everything cut and ready to go. So now we're going to start putting together our half square triangles. And you know how easy this is? So let's start with our large blue and purple. What you're going to do is you're going to put these right sides together and stitch a 1/4 inch all the way around. You do not need to pivot. I do a 1/4 inch, come back and around. Okay, go and get that done, and then I'll show you how to cut it. And I forgot to mention that I always pin my layers together, so I just put 4 pins to keep everything nice and square before I go to the sewing machine. So as you can see, I have an edge all the way around. Okay, then we get rid of my pins, and we're going to cut this in 4. Once again, I use my rotating mat. So I do corner to corner, matching the seams that I stitch, not necessarily the corners of the fabric if I'm slightly off. So I use the intersecting points of my corners. I do pretty slow so I don't disrupt things, but of course it did a little bit. You just put those a little back together. As I said, we're making these oversized, so it's not quite as critical. And then I rotated, and now I'm cutting the opposite direction, which means I now have 4 half square triangles. Look at there. Okay, before you take the next step, you're going to want to take them to the ironing board. And no, I'm good. Am I? No, I'm not. Oh my. Well, this is what happens when I'm trying to think too hard. And the last time I did this, I used this method and I ended up with 4 of these. And I only needed 2. So this was not how we were supposed to do this. So these we're going to set aside because now I'm going to have to go cut 2 more pieces of fabric, 6" each. So you can use the chapters below to stitch ahead or jump ahead of my oops and get to where you need to be. But since I screwed up that, we're going to go to this one. We're going to make our 2.5 inch half square triangles for our corner, and these we are making 4 at a time. So you're going to do the exact same thing I just told you. You're going to put your 2 4¼ inch squares together. I'm going to pin them, and you're going to go to the sewing machine and stitch around the edges, and then we're going to come back and cut it just like I showed you. So let's go do that, and then while I'm doing that, I'm going to cut my pieces of fabric that I grooved. Sorry. Okay, now we've got our 4¼ inch squares, our light blue and our purple, stitched all the way around the edges. Yes, you know what we're going to do because you already saw me do it when I did my goof, unless you skipped ahead. What we're going to do is cut this on the diagonal both directions. And I always put my ruler to the seam intersection, not necessarily the corner of my square, in case it's off. In this case, mine's gotten a little off. So in this case, I can just put the a line in the middle that's straight, and then line up the middle here. And there we go. We can still accomplish the same thing even if the square moves on me when I'm cutting it. Okay, I now have my 4 little half square triangles. We're going to have 4 of those. We're going to press those before we move on to the next step because we want them nice and accurate. You know what? Expediency today. Yep, I'm busy trying to get this done before I leave town. Yes, again. So once you press these, then we're going to trim these up, because these are going to be oversized. We are going to trim these up to be 2.5 inches. So this gives you about 1/8 of an inch around. So line up your ruler that has a diagonal on it. Line your diagonal up corner to corner on the seam, making sure down here you have room to trim underneath the 2.5, and the same over here on this side. And of course, around the top and the bottom. So we're going to trim that, and then we're going to flip it around. So now this is the side we just cut, which is straight. So now we can keep the line of our ruler, the angle on our seam, but the 2.5 inch mark should be right on the edge of our block if we cut accurately. Okay, and then you're going to cut around here. And you're going to do this for all 4 of your half square triangles that you made. Okay, so we've got perfect 2.5 inch half square triangles. You're going to have 4 of those. Okay, back to our other half square triangles that we need. This is my 6-inch block of my blue and my purple. We're putting these right sides together. Here's the difference. I only need 2 half square triangles, and that's why I'm using a 6-inch block. If I wanted 4, I would have used an 8-inch block. So I have another video out there that's making half square triangles, 1, 2, and 4 at a time. So go out there and check that out, because if you're making a quilt with this block, make them 4 at a time, because you're going to need multiple of them. Okay, what we're going to do in this case, what we want to do is cut this in half and have a seam on either side. So what I do is I put the 1/4 inch mark of my ruler, corner to corner, and then, see, I've got light blue, so you're going to see my pencil mark, and then I mark a 1/4 inch off center. And as right now I've got it on top of my purple. It's just as easy to get this marked before you do that. And then I'm going to do, once again, my 1/4 inch mark is corner to corner, and I'm marking therefore a 1/4 inch away from center on the other side. So now I have 2 lines a 1/4 inch off center. Now, right sides together. Once again, I like to pin to keep it from shifting, and you're going to go to the sewing machine and you're going to stitch on each of those lines. Now, if you're somebody that would rather mark the center and then stitch a 1/4 inch away from the center and flip it, you do you. Either way, you need a line, stitch line, a 1/4 inch on either side of center. Okay, let's go do that. Now I have my 2 lines stitched off center, and now I'm going to cut this in half right between the 2 stitch lines. You do not need to use a rotary cutter. Usually what I do is I go to the ironing board and just use my scissors, because the next thing we want to do is press this open. I'm pressing to the dark side. Okay, as you can see now, we have 2 half square triangles. Those are pretty big to be used in this quilt, right? Yes, because what we need to do is we're going to cut them in half. By cutting them in half, we're getting our halves of a half square triangle there, 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 and there. And they need to be opposite of each other. So this works out really slick. Make sure you go to the ironing board and press that really nicely. Don't do what I'm doing right now, but I think I got pretty good nails. So this saves me a video cut for Kevin, and he'll appreciate it. So now that you've got both of the blocks pressed, we are going to cut them corner to corner. Make sure you keep a line on your ruler on the seam as you get corner to corner there, to make sure you've got a nice even cut there, and then cut corner to corner. Okay, you're going to do that with both of those. I'm going to set that aside because I don't want to do anything with it till I press the other one. Okay, now you pretty much have everything cut out that you need to mess with. Now we're going to get these blocks finished. So we need our half square triangles that we just cut in half with our orange triangles. Okay? So I'm going to grab 2 of those and set those aside for my other one. As you can see, by putting our half square triangles on here, they're going to end up being opposites, which is exactly what we need. And you'll also find our pieced half square triangles are slightly larger than our cut. That's okay. I used sizes to do these things that worked well with measurements and allowing you to trim up. So if you're concerned and wanting to make sure you get this laid out so you have enough room on either side, make sure the corner is up here at the top if you want. Otherwise, fold this triangle in half and get yourself a little mark. Then put that mark on the seam of that lower half square triangle that we cut in half. There we go. Now you know you've got this laid exactly on top of the other correctly. So you're going to do that with, and I'm going to just eyeball this one right now. You're going to do that with both of these, and you're going to stitch 1/4 inch from the edge of the long line. You have this other half square triangle that you're going to cut in half, and you've got 2 more orange triangles. So you're going to do the exact same with this. So you're going to end up with 4 of these when you're done. Now that you have your squares with your purple and blue and your orange, we need to trim these up. As I said, we're working with oversized blocks. This needs to be cut to be a 4.5 inch square. The important thing is that we keep our lines here going into a corner and over here. Once again, I love my OmniGrid ruler so that I can keep everything with my angle here. So what I do initially is I like to have this angle up here towards the upper right, and I put the angle of my ruler there on that seam, and then, as I said, this is going to be 4.5. So I scoot this down a bit. Yeah, we got quite a bit of wiggle room in this. I need my 4.5 inch here and my 4.5 inch up there at the intersection of my fabric. And I need this to be on this angle, this seam of this side of the fabric. Okay, so we're going to just slide that down a tad. And sometimes you might have to do some micro adjustments, a little bit off center if necessary. And then once you've got that, then you trim here. Okay, now we've got one side, we flip it. Now this is my side that can safely go on the 4.5 inch. Keep your line here. You should have the edge, the intersection of your fabrics there and there at your 4.5 inch mark, and you can trim the rest of it. Hoo-hoo-hoo. Look at there. You have a very pretty 4.5 inch block. Okay, you're going to need to do that with the other 3 that you have. Okay, now we come to what I consider the most putsy piece of the project, and that are these pesky little triangles we made. Okay, because they have to go on either side of our 2.5 inch square. Okay, so as I said, generally speaking, when you have a 2.5 inch unfinished block and you're going to tack triangles on the side of it, you're going to start with a a 2 7/8 inch and cut it in half. Well, that was going to be a lot of small squares to cut in half when we needed 8 of them. So I made the bigger square and cut it in 4 and did it twice. Okay, so these are a tad bigger than you need. Not a lot, a little. What I like to do is I always lay these out because doggone it, I never get them next to my squares right until I lay them out, because you want to make sure it looks like this. I need my purple or whatever color fabric you want on the inside of your block. As you can see here, you want that. Let's do it this way. There, up there. This is going to be on the inside of the block. I need the angle of these little triangles to be like this, okay? So I always lay it out like this so I don't screw it up, because otherwise I always do. Then you're going to take your 2.5 inch half square triangle and put it on this one. Because these are a tad oversized, you can safely leave a little bit of the lower triangle out here to the right. Don't leave a lot. If you're really worried, give it a tug almost all the way over. The benefit of leaving a little is if your seam is a little kittywampus, this allows us to trim this off later and you'll still be okay. Otherwise, you can always put this all the way over to the right and get this half square triangle right in the corner of your triangle. As you can see, we've got more than 1/4 inch off the end. You do whatever works for you. And if you're struggling with this and just you need more wiggle room, then make your, excuse me, I had you cut a 4 1/4 inch square and we cut it 4 ways. Go up to 4 1/2. As I said, this is the most putsy and you need the most accuracy on this one. Okay, I am going to hedge a little bit to the left to give myself a little wiggle room here to trim. Okay, and I'm going to pin that. And you can do this. What I suggest you do is do it on one first and make sure you're good with how much you're leaving or not. I took a little too much once and it's like, oh, got to take it out because it got things out of whack and I didn't have enough over here. Do one and see how it goes for you. Okay, so take that and you're going to stitch a 1/4 inch on that side of your block. Okay, I have already done that on this one. So then you're going to press it to the triangle. Okay, as you can see, I've got a little bit of room over here. So now we take this and put it on top of the other one. And of course, I'm using batiks, and so you can't tell. We're doing everything right side together. Once again, you're going to put that on there. I've got just a little wiggle room over here to the left because I've tried this a few times and I know about how much I can safely have over there and not screw things up. Okay, whoopsie, whoopsie. Then you're going to pin this because if you don't, you're going to have a problem. Oh, and of course I left my little purple thing over on the sewing machine because I want to point out with all of these blocks that we're dealing with the triangles, a lot of times, at least for me, when I get to the very edge, this triangle part at the very bottom, so, well, if I was sewing this way, this triangle at the bottom likes to shift on me, and then my seams get out of whack, which is why just a little wiggle room here. If you use a purple thing or a stylus or something to hold down the end of your block as you're sewing to keep that corner straight as you get to the very end, that will go a long way in helping your accuracy. Okay, so you're going to do that. So I've got those. Now, I had, there it is. This one I already have done. So now we're ready to square it up. As you can see here, you're like, oh, yeah, it's a little kitty wampus. We got some spaces. I don't know, maybe you can't see that. I'll take a picture of it. The key thing is that this has to stay the size it is. You can't trim this off or you're going to screw things up because this was sized down to exactly what you needed already. Okay? So that is going to be our basis for trimming up this block. So if we put this in our lower right corner, then, see, is this how I did this? Hold on. Sorry. There we go. Put it in the upper right corner. Sorry. This, from this seam to the edges, should be 2 1/4 inches because this is a 1/4 inch still that we haven't taken off. So if you're lining your ruler up with your seams, so there's my 2 1/4, my 2 1/4. That should be square with that half square triangle still. We're not trimming it. But as you can see, I have room to trim over here. That one's a little, not a lot to trim. Yep, this is what I mean about these itty bitty triangles like to get themselves twisted sometimes. Okay, I'm going to turn that. And then here I've got room to trim. And what you want to keep an eye on is making sure you have a 1/4 inch from the corner of this to the edge, because that's where you really need your 1/4 inch of your angle there to make this all work and not cut off that in the process. Okay, so I'm going to shift that there. Okay. Cut that. Cut that little bugger. All right. Now, once again, you make sure you get everything pressed before you do any of this trimming. So now, what I discovered is on my, this is a 6x12. It's got extra angles in here. And guess what it's really slick for? Okay, now I gotta find it again, doggone it. I did this, there we go. I've got a 45-degree right there, and if I put that on this seam here, I can make sure that I can cut an angle and I still have my 1/4 inch from this corner, this square, to the edge, because that's where I need to line up my seam when I sew on my, there it is, on the bigger triangle. Okay, so we're going to put that there. I got a little dot there on my ruler that says this is my 45-degree angle, and that's where the edge of that half square triangle is. And there we go. And now I can safely trim off this edge of my triangle. And no, I'm not trimming off too much. Okay, I know. This will, it's all up to you. If you're super accurate with your blocks, go completely the size you need and no trimming. In this case, I prefer it better this way. Okay, you're gonna do those steps and get 4 of these, okay? Then we're gonna take our purple triangles. We have 4 of these, and we're gonna attach it to this. Once again, our purple, just like our orange, is oversized. So if it makes you more comfortable, fold it in half and get a mark where the middle is. Put this on top of it, and that seam, that intersecting seam, is going to be right there in the middle of this purple triangle. There, and line that up. Whoops. Yep. And you're going to pin this so you don't let it shift. And here, down here, is where I usually struggle with having this shift as I'm coming to the very end. So I use a purple thing to hold that down to keep my 1/4 inch seam. Okay, make all of these pieces, trim them up, and attach them to your purple triangles and stitch a 1/4 inch. You should intersect right there in that seam, and that makes sure that you don't chop it off. And then we'll trim up this block. Okay, we now have all of our little corner squares ready to trim up. This needs to be a 4.5-inch trimmed up block. So this side you've already trimmed up because of how we trimmed up the triangle to put on the purple triangle. Therefore, all we need to do is trim up the other side. Put your ruler on the block. This should be your 4.5. Your 4.5 should hit here on that corner and up there. If it's not quite, and then in here, this should be a 2.25-inch window in there. Okay. So we're going to trim that up. All right. Woohoo! And now that everything's trimmed up, we're ready to put it all together. And this is the second time I'm laying this out, because the first time I realized just before I started sewing things, I think something seems a little off. Yes, so I'm going to point out how you need to be careful as you lay things out. So let's start with our middle blue. And we know we've got our outside squares with our big purple triangle in the middle. And double check that your little triangle is also the same color if you followed the same layout that I did. Okay, now you're ready for these. My first thought was, and the one I did before I had it oops and started the recording again, is, oh, I just need to make sure purple is matching next to there. No, that is not the case. The orientation of these triangles matter. So we're going to start with this one. Purple next to the center, and orange is down there. Now we need purple in the middle, and orange is also to the right. This next one, I could go purple in the middle. Oops, no. The orange is in the wrong position. The orange needs to be this one, where the orange is up. And so then the final one is there. So use the template that you can request below and make sure you've got your orientation right of both your big orange triangles here and the fact that you've got the purple in the middle. Okay, double, triple, checking before I do this. All right, we got this time. Then I like to work in rows. So we're going to put this over here. This corner down here is one corner where we're going to have seams that need to be matched. So I like to line those up and just kind of nest those in there. And since it goes all the way up here, I usually kind of double check that it's nice and straight all the way across before I pin it. This one's easy peasy. We put there, no seams to match. I'm going to just pin it once for now. And then this one together, there's no seams that we're matching here. So we just match those up. And then you're going to go to the sewing machine and stitch 1/4 inch on each side there. There we go. And because this is a big block with no seams, I pressed towards the blue. Therefore, on the top and the bottom, I press towards the large orange triangle. Therefore, when we put these together, we have nested seams. And you guessed it, now we're going to put this on top of this. Woohoo! No matching seams. Oops. No matching seams. And one on this. This is why I caught my problem when I was videoing before, because I'm like, there's supposed to be another set that matches. Okay, I'm going to pin these, and then you're going to stitch a 1/4 inch on each of these rows. Okay, we have our rows done. Now we're ready to put them together. Okay, so whichever way you want to do it. And here we're going to have more matching seams. So you're going to want to watch these points so you don't chop them off. I'm going to put that there. And yep, I'm going to flip it over because then I can do this. And I can keep an eye on that seam. And over here, you want this angle to match up there. So I'm going to pin that. And then use a pin here. So this intersection there of your seams should be right there with the other one. Yep. Okay, I have one square that's a little off, but that's all right. We'll match it up there, and the same over here. It looks like I'm going to need to do a little easing in. Okay. Yep, sometimes that happens, which is why the more seams you have, the better chance of that thing's happening. So I'm going to check my intersection here on this one. All right, it's going to hit. Good. All right, so you're going to do that and stitch a 1/4 inch. Instead of doing another video cut, open that up, making sure you keep your blue in the middle. And now we're going to put this on top of here. Once again, you've got your points here to match to make sure you don't chop them off. And then over here, this needs to match up with there. Okay, so let's start in the middle. A lot of times I'll start pinning in the middle versus an edge and get that lined up. We can do that, and then the same over here. Yep, this one looks a lot better than that last row did. And then here, it's going to be just right. And then here at the edge, we want to straighten this out and line it up with that. Okay, it looks like I got to ease that in just a tad. Okay, so now I have it all pinned, my 2 rows together, and I'm going to go and stitch a 1/4 inch there, making sure we keep this out of the way, and then a 1/4 inch on the other one, okay? And then you're going to have a finished block. Other than the putsy little stuff here, it goes together pretty fast by using half square triangles, 4 at a time and 2 at a time when I do it right. Okay, then as far as pressing is concerned, I was able to, because I did it in rows first and then put it together, I was able to pinwheel my corners here. So then once you get all your rows put together, you can come here and in the middle, you can just twist these seams just a tad and they will open up, and that way one goes this way, one seam will go up and the other seams will go down, and it will have a lot less bulk here in the middle. You'll be very happy with that. And there we go. That is 12.5 inches. I hope you enjoyed this, and use the link below to request the template where I'll have additional information on various sizes and show you an example of, oh, I gotta have Kevin put that here. These are a couple of layouts that you can do if your entire quilt is this block. Just by twisting the blocks a tad, you can end up with a different look. So you can check that out in the template as well. Thank you, and take care, and thank you so much for watching.